Emma Lyon, the daughter of a Cheshire blacksmith, was a pauper, cast aside and destined to fade into oblivion. Yet Emma did the unthinkable. Instead of succumbing to fate, she sold her body, posed for artists, and charmed aristocrats. This path led her to become the premier muse of London, and then Naples. Ultimately, she married Sir William Hamilton, the British Envoy. The myth of her as an innocent beauty who stumbled into high society is merely a convenient smokescreen. Emma was a calculating opportunist, deliberately forging her way to the top, using her beauty as a weapon, not just a gift. Her story is not a sentimental Cinderella tale, but a stark manual on survival and ascent in a world where a woman without fortune had only one fate: to be forgotten. But Emma Hamilton had no intention of being forgotten. Behind this relentless drive for ascent lay not just ambition, but a chilling fear of the abyss from which Emma Lyon had miraculously escaped. She was born in 1765 in the tiny village of Destined, Cheshire. Her father, a common blacksmith, died before she was 2 years old, leaving her mother and daughter in absolute destitution. There was no inheritance, no connections, no future beyond grinding poverty. Her mother, forced to work as a maid, barely made ends meet. Emma grew up in conditions where every day was a struggle for survival, and the only prospect for a girl of her class was either to marry an equally poor laborer, become a servant, or, most often, plummet to the lowest depths, where the selling of bodies thrived. It was this environment, where a woman without status was merely an expendable commodity, that forged her steely resolve. Emma didn't just see, she experienced firsthand what it meant to be powerless, dependent, and vulnerable. Her body, her beauty, her intellect, these were not simply natural gifts, but her only assets, her sole currency in a world that gave her nothing for free. This simple, brutal truth became her greatest trauma, and simultaneously, her main driving force. She understood this very early, perhaps the moment she first encountered male desire or realized that her appearance sparked an interest that opened doors closed to everyone else. This became her point of no return, the realization that her body was not a burden or a source of shame, but a tool of power, a way to escape her predetermined fate. She didn't sell herself out of desperation. She invested in her future, transforming every humiliation into a stepping stone to the top. Her survival demanded not innocence, but ruthless pragmatism. Her ascent was no accident, but rather a logical consequence of an era that was itself a colossal gamble. The world of the late 18th century, like a seething cauldron, was digesting old orders and birthing new, not always respectable opportunities. Britain, then mistress of the seas and colonies, was at the peak of its power, but this imperial facade concealed internal fissures. Society was divided into strict classes where birth determined destiny, and avenues for social mobility simply didn't exist for most. London, the capital of the world, shone with the lights of aristocratic balls and theaters, but in its dark alleys, poverty, crime, and a desperate search for survival flourished. This era was a time of immense contrasts. On one hand, the flourishing of the Enlightenment, scientific discoveries, revolutionary ideas of freedom and equality. On the other, unbridled aristocratic power, the slave trade, and the disenfranchisement of women and the lower classes. It was precisely in this paradoxical space, where wealth coexisted with desperate poverty and Puritan morality lived alongside unbridled hedonism, that the conditions for figures like Emma were formed. For a man from the lower classes, there was still a faint possibility of making a name in war or trade, but for a woman without fortune or connections, there was only one path: either a marriage of convenience, servitude, or, most often, a fall into an abyss from which there was no return. However, parallel to this official, rigid world, there existed another, the demi-monde, a world of courtesans, models, and actresses. It had its own rules, its own hierarchy, its own currencies. Here, beauty and wit could become capital, and scandal was not a brand, but a means to attract attention. High society, despite its ostentatious hypocrisy, was obsessed with intrigues, gossip, and exotic fascinations. Wealthy aristocrats, embarking on their grand tours across Europe, sought not only cultural treasures, but also forbidden pleasures, shedding the shackles of English primness in Naples or Paris. It was this atmosphere of double standards, where public condemnation bordered on secret admiration, where a bottomless appetite for sin and luxury lurked behind a facade of strict morality, that became the ideal fertile ground for an adventure like Emma's. This was not just a backdrop, it was the very stage on which her drama unfolded. The stage was set, but Emma had no intention of waiting in the wings. She stepped directly into the heart of London's demi-monde, where her beauty and fearlessness instantly became a commodity. Her first notable role, her first public affair, was her position as the goddess Hygeia in Dr. James Graham's so-called Temple of Health. This was not a medical institution, but rather an erotic theater of the absurd, where for exorbitant sums, wealthy aristocrats could be cured with electricity, magnetism, and of course, a semi-nude Emma who sat on the celestial bed, radiating vital energy. She didn't just pose, she played a role, transforming herself into a living installation, an object of worship and desire. This was her first lesson in manipulating public image, her first conscious step in transforming her body into a tool for profit and advancement. It was there, in this show on the brink of science and pornography, that Emma was noticed by Charles Francis Greville, an aristocrat, member of Parliament, art collector, and more importantly, a collector of women. Greville was not in love. He was an investor who saw in Emma an unpolished but promising asset. He took her from the temple, provided lodging, and paid for lessons in music, dance, and etiquette. This was Emma's second, far more subtle affair, or rather, her meticulously planned education. She didn't just become his mistress, she became his project, his student, absorbing the knowledge and manners of high society like a sponge. Greville was, in essence, polishing a diamond he hoped to sell profitably, or at the very least, use for his own reputation. He sought to make her an ideal companion, capable of charming anyone, while remaining completely under his control. However, when Greville's financial affairs faltered, he conceived the most cynical and grand deal of Emma's life. His uncle, Sir William Hamilton, the British Envoy to Naples, had recently lost his wife. Sir William, a passionate collector of antiquities, was lonely and needed a companion. Greville, without batting an eye, offered Emma as a gift, ostensibly for music and painting lessons in Naples. He sent her there, assuring her he would soon follow, but this was a lie. Emma was not simply passed from hand to hand. She was deliberately deceived, used as a pawn in family financial games. This was a moment of absolute humiliation, when she realized that her upbringing had merely been preparation for this commercial transaction. But instead of breaking down, Emma displayed her iron will, transforming this cruel manipulation into her greatest triumph. She didn't simply submit to fate, she seized it. Upon arriving in Naples and realizing the true extent of Greville's betrayal, Emma immediately set to work. Before her stood Sir William Hamilton, an elderly but influential aristocrat, an enlightened collector, and most importantly, a lonely man. Emma instantly assessed his vulnerabilities and her opportunities. She understood. The path back was cut off, and her only chance for a future was to win this man's heart, not as a fleeting mistress, but as something far greater. She did not beg to return to London or throw tantrums. On the contrary, she embraced the new reality with disarming pragmatism. Her toolkit had already been honed by Greville, but now she directed it towards a much more complex goal. Emma didn't just use her beauty as bait, she transformed it into a work of art capable of speaking without words. She began to employ her famous attitudes, living pictures where, draped in light tunics, she mimicked the poses of ancient statues and mythological characters, changing her facial expressions and body positions with astonishing grace. This was not merely posing, it was a meticulously choreographed one-woman show, a demonstration not only of physical attractiveness, but also a deep understanding of art, culture, and classical aesthetics, all that Sir William so valued. She not only gave him a spectacle, but also engaged him in an intellectual game, becoming his living gallery, his muse, his ideal companion in the world of antiquity. Beyond visual impact, Emma artfully deployed her mental and emotional resources. She listened intently to Sir William, showing genuine interest in his collections, his studies of volcanoes, and his diplomatic duties. She demonstrated not just erudition, but also sensitivity, an ability to empathize. She was not just another beauty, but a conversationalist capable of holding her own on any topic, from ancient Roman pottery to political intrigues at the Neapolitan court. Emma played on his desire for not just a mistress, but a partner who shared his passions, capable of understanding and appreciating his world. She became for him what his deceased wife could not provide, a source of inspiration and vibrant energy. Her strategy was multi-layered. On one hand, she cultivated the image of the ideal Enlightenment woman, educated, graceful, inspiring. On the other, she did not forget her natural, unbridled passion, which burst forth in her attitudes and lively interactions, contrasting with the primness of aristocratic ladies. This contrast made her even more alluring. She did not attempt to completely hide her humble origins, but skillfully transformed them into part of her unique charisma, proof that true value could be found not only in noble birth, but also in strength of spirit and talent. She didn't just sell herself, she remarketed herself, but on her own terms, creating a new brand, Emma Hamilton, a name that would soon become synonymous not only with beauty, but also with unprecedented influence. She was not a passive plaything of fate. She was an active architect of her new reality, masterfully using every facet of her personality as a tool to achieve her goals. Her strategy worked with astonishing success. Sir William, enchanted by her wit, beauty, and artistry, soon realized that Emma was more to him than just a companion or an object for aesthetic experiments. She became indispensable. His world, filled with ancient artifacts and volcanic observations, suddenly came alive with her presence, her vibrant energy. He, a 60-year-old aristocrat accustomed to primness and predictability, was utterly captivated by this young woman who, not long ago, had been sitting on a celestial bed in a London sideshow. The proposal of marriage, made by Sir William, was for Emma not merely the culmination of her Neapolitan mission, but the ultimate confirmation of her unique ability to rewrite her own destiny. The marriage took place in London in September 1791 at St. George's Church, Hanover Square. The very fact of this marriage was a slap in the face to all of British high society. Emma, a former dancer, artist's model, mistress, a woman without lineage, became Lady Hamilton, the wife of one of Britain's most influential and respected diplomats. It was unheard of, unprecedented, bordering on a social explosion. London salons buzzed with gossip, indignation, and secret admiration. How dared this upstart, this woman of easy virtue, so brazenly invade their closed world? But Emma didn't just invade. She conquered, using not her birth, but pure, unadulterated will to win. Charles Francis Greville felt particular anger and humiliation. He, who had sent her to Naples as an unwanted gift, as a bargaining chip, was stunned. Greville had expected Emma to remain his obedient mistress, whom he could recall or pass on at any moment. He saw her only as an asset to be profitably exploited, never imagining that this asset would turn against him, transforming into an independent, powerful figure. His cynical plan ended in complete fiasco. Emma not only escaped his control, she surpassed all his expectations by marrying his uncle. This was not just betrayal in his eyes, but a direct insult to his shrewdness, his male superiority. He, the investor, had been outmaneuvered by his own investment. His anger was boundless, and he did not hide his contempt for Emma, even after her marriage, continuing to spread rumors about her past. Greville became not just a former patron, but the main antagonist in her personal drama, a symbol of the old world that Emma had so boldly shattered. For Emma, this was the apex of her ascent. She not only secured the status, wealth, and security she could only dream of, but also gained something far more valuable: freedom. Freedom from the constant fear of poverty, from the need to sell herself, from dependence. Sir William, despite the age difference, became for her not just a husband, but a loyal ally, protector, and even a friend. He valued her not only for her beauty, but also for her lively mind, her energy, her ability to adapt and charm. He was proud of her, showcased her, and defended her from society's attacks. Under his wing, Emma flourished, becoming not just an ambassador's wife, but the full-fledged hostess of one of Naples' most influential salons. This marriage became her shield and her sword, a shield against a past that could no longer reach her, and a sword with which she carved her way to even greater influence. From then on, her position was unassailable. She didn't just survive. She triumphed in a game whose rules were written against her. She didn't become a Cinderella who accidentally found a prince. She was a strategic genius who turned humiliation into triumph and a desperate situation into a stepping stone to the pinnacle of power. However, even at the height of her power, when it seemed that Emma Hamilton had definitively rewritten her destiny, she faced a trial that not only changed her life, but forever inscribed her name in history, albeit with a touch of tragedy. In 1798, Admiral Horatio Nelson, Britain's greatest naval hero, whose fame echoed throughout Europe after his victory at the Battle of the Nile, arrived in Naples. His arrival was not just an event, but an earthquake that shook not only diplomatic circles but also Lady Hamilton's personal world. Nelson, exhausted by war, scarred by battles, having lost an arm and an eye, was a living embodiment of national triumph and personal sacrifice. He was far from the ideal classical hero, but his aura as a victor, his charisma, and his genuine need for warmth and admiration instantly filled the void in Emma's life. She, in turn, was at the peak of her beauty and influence, the hostess of Naples' most brilliant salon, surrounded by adoration and luxury. This encounter was not accidental. It was a collision of two powerful yet vulnerable natures, destined for mutual attraction. Emma, who had so long built her life on calculation, for the first time allowed herself to succumb to an all-consuming passion. This became her fatal error, her last, most risky step, which brought down everything she had so meticulously constructed. Their affair developed rapidly, in full view of the entire Neapolitan court, which initially observed with astonishment, then with open contempt. Sir William Hamilton, the aging husband, at first welcomed Nelson as a national hero and friend. He even took pride in how his brilliant wife could charm such distinguished figures. But very soon, their relationship crossed the boundaries of propriety. Emma and Nelson ceased to hide their liaison, turning the British Embassy in Naples into a backdrop for their passionate drama. This was not merely a breach of marital fidelity. It was a scandal that cast a shadow on British diplomacy, on Sir William's reputation, and most importantly, on Lady Hamilton's carefully constructed image. Emma, who had so skillfully manipulated perceptions, now found herself trapped by her own desire. Her attitudes and artistry, previously instruments of her ascent, were now directed at one man, Nelson, who became the center of her universe. She didn't just love him, she was obsessed with him, his fame, his wounds, his heroic aura. This obsession led her to disregard public opinion, diplomatic etiquette, and even Sir William's feelings. Society, which had once admired her audacity and talent, now saw her only as a fallen woman, destroying another's family and reputation. Emma's unmasking occurred not overnight, but gradually, as their affair became increasingly public and shameless. London salons, which had once buzzed with indignation over her marriage, now seethed with schadenfreude. The former courtesan had returned to her true nature. People whispered behind Lady Hamilton's back. Her meticulously built image as a refined lady and the muse of an enlightened aristocrat began to crumble. Her beauty, which had been her main weapon, now seemed merely a lure for sin. Even Sir William, who maintained tenderness and affection for her until his death, could not hide his humiliation. He found himself in the awkward position of a husband whose wife openly lived with another man under his own roof. This triangle became the culmination of her Neapolitan life, transforming her from an influential salon hostess into an object of universal condemnation and gossip. This was the price for her greatest, most sincere passion, which also proved to be her greatest weakness. The open affair between Emma and Admiral Nelson in Naples could not go unanswered by the British Crown. The scandal surrounding envoy Sir William Hamilton and his wife cast a shadow on British diplomacy. In 1801, Sir William was recalled from Naples. This was not merely a retirement, but an unspoken punishment, ending his impeccable career with a disgraceful removal. Such a step was a direct political blow from the court, demonstrating intolerance for moral transgressions in the highest echelons of power. For Lady Hamilton, the consequences were even more devastating. Her brilliant salon in Naples emptied. High society turned its back. Her name, once a symbol of phenomenal ascent, became synonymous with promiscuity and disgrace. Her beauty and charm, once instruments of her rise, depreciated, becoming merely a source of scandal in the eyes of society. Emma's financial situation, despite her status as an ambassador's wife, remained precarious. Without patronage and connections, her future looked bleak, and prospects for further advancement vanished. Admiral Nelson, though he retained his heroic status, felt the cold breath of public censure. The Admiralty expressed displeasure, delaying promotions and withholding appointments. His wife demanded a divorce, exacerbating the public scandal. The royal family, particularly Queen Charlotte, refused to receive Emma at court. This was a state condemnation, stripping her of hope for official recognition. Emma Hamilton, who played by her own rules, encountered the harsh rules of the society she had so desperately sought to conquer, and paid the highest price for passion, the loss of status and reputation. Despite the full force of public condemnation that fell upon Lady Hamilton, the true drama of her legacy unfolded not in immediate judgment, but in how history chooses its heroes and its victims. Admiral Nelson, despite his egregious adultery, was elevated to a pedestal of national greatness. His name became a symbol of unwavering honor and courage, and his personal transgressions were erased from collective memory, buried beneath layers of victories and patriotism. Emma, on the other hand, was transformed from a brilliant salon hostess into the archetype of the fallen woman, whose name served as a cautionary tale, not an example to emulate. The paradox of her fate is that she, being an active creator of her own life, ultimately became a passive object of a historical myth, created by men and for men. Society needed an impeccable hero, and for the sake of that ideal, it was willing to turn a blind eye to his human weaknesses, shifting all blame for the scandal onto the temptress. Thus, a convenient version of history was written, where the great admiral fell victim to feminine charms, rather than consciously choosing a path that defied accepted morality. This was not merely a falsification of facts, but a cruel act of erasing female agency, reducing a complex personality to a one-dimensional cliché. Her strength, her talent, her ability to survive and triumph in a world hostile to her, were ignored, giving way to a simplified image. The universal lesson of Emma Hamilton's story lies not in a moralistic condemnation of her choices, but in understanding the ruthless mechanisms of power and public opinion. Her path is not just a chronicle of a courtesan's life, but a fierce struggle for a woman's right to exist, a right to self-determination in an era when such a right simply did not exist for her. She was neither a saint nor an innocent victim. She was a pragmatic, calculating, yet deeply vulnerable woman who, until the very end, played by rules she did not set herself. Her downfall is not so much a consequence of her sin as it is the inevitable result of the clash between her audacious freedom and the unyielding Puritan morality and male dominance that did not forgive a woman such power over her own destiny. Emma Hamilton's story reminds us that even the greatest will to win can be powerless in the face of how the world chooses to remember, or rather, to forget.